All right, hello and welcome to Testroid webinar. Today's topic, how to reliably measure and optimize graphics performance of your Android games. We're co-hosting, my name is Ville-Veikko Helppi and I'm co-hosting this webinar together with Sharif Sagar, who is Director of Business Development at GameBench.
Hi guys, hello everybody.
And we'll be, of course, having as informal, as interactive webinar as usually. So if you have any questions or if you would like to see something special, we are reserving some time at the end for Q&A. So please use the right-hand side box, and there's a questions section. So you can type those questions at any time, and also, if there is any other things you want to cover. If we have time, we'll be happy to walk you through some of the most essential things in the graphics performance and also introducing you more to the GameBench and Testroid. My agenda for this presentation looks like this. So as usual, we'll start with some statistics from Q2. There's lots of test runs and results you guys have been running at Testroid Cloud, so I've gathered some material for you to see how things are going. We'll be looking some generic things about mobile games. How do you test mobile games? Why and how actually that is done today? What kind of new things, features, and benefits we have for you guys? Then Sharif will take over. He will introduce us more and talk a bit more about GameBench, what GameBench is really and who it's built for, who's using it, what kind of team they have background, and so on. And of course, we will end it up on hands-on demonstration and, like I said, Q&A at the end. So it's very important that you guys, if you have any questions, we have our experts online here to talk about the graphics performance on Android devices and of course using GameBench with that.
Yeah, also hoping to have a colleague of mine from GameBench, Jake Danes, to come on pretty soon, and he'll also help to answer questions about GameBench integration that are of a more technical nature. I'm just going to make sure that Jake is coming on board.
Excellent. All right, let's start with some stats. So Q2 was the busiest ever quarter for us as test run wise. There was nearly 28 million device runs done at Testroid Cloud, nearly 900,000 test cases. Android still is primarily the main platform. We saw about 300,000 more iOS test runs, so that's definitely increasing. Android, of course, and is the main platform. There's a lot of devices we host, so there is obviously devices to try out. We still have average test time about 3 minutes 26 seconds. This really hasn't changed. I've been surprised how pretty similar value it has stayed for years, but that's average time that one test takes on a device after you don't count in installations and boots and restarts and stuff like that, but strictly the test itself. And I've been showing this kind of why applications fail, but I wanted to gather some statistics about why mobile games fail, and this was only for Android. Typically, it has been like 2/3 of the issues has been software oriented or related. But this time we saw much more. When we actually gathered this data, we saw much more problems and issues related to the hardware when actually people tested their games on those. What was actually surprised was that chipset, of course, in general, whatever chipset you have in a device, it was relatively low when you actually tested applications, but with games, it got more significant. Same happened with the memory, display, and sensors. Of course, for example, the orientation of your screen is important in the games. Display, does it show all the colors, how the sensors work when you have a gameplay going on, and so on. On the software side, we didn't see that much issues. What was different from the applications? So Platform still counts about 17% of the issues. OEM customizations, their specific UIs, skins, layouts, those layers actually they still cause issues for games. Notifications even on Android, and some other software related issues. For example, if you have combined or if you have integrated social media with your game, some of the devices didn't have Twitter or Facebook or those pre-installed, but you assumed in a game. So these kind of issues you typically see in mobile games and where they fail or crash. From the OS standpoint, I've showed this last time with the iOS and also a different Android variant comparison. So iOS has been slightly more problematic than KitKat, which so far has been pretty robust. Even you see some significant variations over there. Lollipop actually got a bit worse in that wise. There was lots of new APIs introduced. There was lots of new things that actually caused some of the existing legacy applications behave bad. And of course, we have had some time to play with Android M, and we've seen that as usual. I mean, when you have a new major version of the API, you see more problems coming for your game or even a native application. So typically this is the trend. When you have a base version, you have more problems. And when you do a new upgrade with the same APIs, you've focused, or Apple and Google, they focus mostly on the making things more stable and so on. So trend is obviously down. But when there's a new version coming, you see that there's again lift to the more problems. We've been discussing about these observations, what we see, but surprisingly, there was lots of similarities when it comes to the games. Display again, resolution really isn't problem anymore, or sometimes it feels that people pay too much attention to the what's resolution. But for example, like what's the orientation of the screen? Some games have bugs actually that they cannot automatically or make it horizontal or vertical if you have a phone or tablet on a certain position. Chipsets, even more important with the games. You build a game, you test it on a high-end device, and then people download it from the market and try to run it with some low-end device, and you see what basically happens. So it runs easily out of memory. It can CPU the processor cannot actually handle all the calls. They cannot actually make the gameplay smooth, and apparently there might be crashes and things like that. So even in the cases of games, this is even more important than with the native applications. It's still, this is surprisingly, again, this is still the same. So I mean, we counted whole H1 results, 57 test cycles approximately before you actually publish an application, and that's an average. Of course, some applications, some games need more attention, are tested more and more. You have more test cycles than others, but this is the average number of it. Also, what we typically recommend here at Testoroid, that please pay attention to the older ones as well. So take a look at the Google dashboard, what operating system versions are actually used currently. It's not always the best idea to focus on the latest and greatest, but really try to get the most covering test proportion as you can. So we, of course, we host even still some 2.x devices. If you think it's important, you have access to those devices. Manual testing, it's not recommended, of course. This is something, it's related to games. Game testing has been so manually oriented. Pretty much all games before test automation hit mainstream, or it's still coming, but when people build their games, they actually tested those manually, typically on a few devices. And of course, that's not really efficient. You can cover a lot of devices at the same effort, much faster, cheaper. You don't need people to do that. You can actually build a script that actually goes through those games on different devices. We got this week also, or last week actually, we got OpenSignal's updated report on Android fragmentation. It pretty much looks like this. Of course, it's not the whole truth. It's basically based on their people who actually using their service. So, but it's somewhat relevant for application developers. You have to see that there's a lot of devices actually in this ecosystem. There's even hundreds of relevant devices. If you want to tackle 99% of the market, you have to run it on hundreds of devices. And we, of course, we counted Testro Cloud covers 95%, over 95% of these devices. So we are constantly having these devices online and accessible for you. And when you look at the operating system wise, there's similar fragmentation going on. Of course, the latest ones are getting updated pretty quickly. When Google introduces new versions, you update those. Many of them update. But even with Testro Cloud and GameBench combined together, it's 85% of volumes that we can promise you that you have access to. So it's significant. If you're building a game that you want to target as wide audience as possible, I mean, there's a really good value here with Testro Cloud and GameBench together.
And Ville-Veikko, that's because of our KitKat. I think it's 4.4.1 is the minimum bench support. So hence the drop down to 85%.
Correct. So we are talking roughly about here, somewhere over here, where we have the this is not supported. This is the lowest area here, but all the above, we've been supporting it with this combination of Testro Cloud.
Yeah, 4.1.2. Apologies, that's the minimum.
Yeah, correct. We have actually mentioned it in Testro Cloud. When we look at the demo, I'll show you exactly where you can find it. And this has slightly changed. So if you're targeting game for the US market or global market, and if you want to still have a significant coverage, we published 25 and top Android devices that you need to run last week. It's roughly about 30 now. And global markets, it's roughly 80 to get half of the volumes tackled. So it's significant amount of devices, but that's what we do here at Testroid, and we basically make sure that you have access to these devices anytime. Okay, let's talk a bit about how do you test mobile games. And mobile games and testing mobile games, it's slightly different. That it is with the application. So in applications, functionality, usability, robustness in a way, of course, are very important. Of course, the same kind of features, characteristics are important also in mobile games, but performance, OpenGLES related issues, battery consumption, how that game fully utilizes the all the chipset or hardware capability you have. And it's really recommended that don't leave it for your game engine like Unity or Crytek or whatever you use. Don't leave it for those. You really have to test how it works on these devices, because sometimes there can be loops, there can be something that really drains the performance bad. So again, manual testing, as it has been done before. Nowadays pretty much every company rely and practice agile. So if you have a problems, it causes you enormous delays to find out that there is a performance issue or some issue in your game. So it's preferred always to use daily based testing. Like you build something, you build a new feature, you do a new build, daily, nightly build, and you can instantly run it via API or manually or however you want, with the test automation at Testro Cloud. So it'll automatically run that application. It will actually go through those issues and topics, what you have there, and you will have a fresh report for your engineers next day, what actually didn't work, and they can fix it right away. So as mentioned and shown these problems, some test automation can help you with the, of course, with these devices. So OS versions, different OEMs, they bring you constantly new devices. Really, I mean, globally, there's so many different OEMs that they modify those devices quite heavily. Let's take Xiaomi, for example. Um, Great devices, well performing, but it can be really difficult to get that working with certain applications or games, and they've done something special over there, that in most of the cases you even need to root that to get decent access to that device. So this is definitely where test automation can help you automate all these kind of complex issues with the devices you have. And it's always recommended also that you should use real devices when you test. So emulators don't give you user experience. They don't even give you the actual hardware that's running your software on. There's not similar or identical software there. That's not real Android stack on a device. Infrastructure is not there. There's no Wi-Fi. There's no Bluetooth, these kind of things that you need to communicate, or your application needs to communicate through. And it's important to remember that 0% of the your app users that eventually use your app use emulator to run it. So we've been asked, I think it started about a year ago, pretty significantly. The people started asking, why should I test games? I've used to that I test games, manually in a few devices. If it works, we'll just push it to the market and see, and then we'll fix issues, whatever come as a crash report. I think the whole thing, of course, is monetization and what gamers are willing to buy. If they see bad, crashing, performing application, they don't buy anything from that. So it, of course, starts from your end, understanding how these gamers play it, how they use it, what's the playing experience, eventually can it be monetized. So the UX in general, of course, it's very important. But from our side of our point of view, it's really the performance that actually makes that UX good or bad. And of course, there's different types of tests you can actually do for your game. There's feature-based tests. These are pretty regular functional tests, game for the gameplay, regression every time you build a new version, end user type of testing. So you test compatibility across all the devices or different localizations. But what really is our focus on this webinar and today's is the performance. So of course you can do and build as a script all kinds of stress tests, load tests, soak tests, endurance kind of type of things. What I personally think, we have a fantastic product as a GameBench that can actually bring you instantly great insight how the game is doing on a real device. So you just launch the test, it one click away, and you get results of the FPS and in the future much more. So this really easy and straightforward way to see how the game is actually doing, even in a context, and compare how it did on certain chipset, how it did on certain device. Chipset doesn't always explain everything. Devices, OEMs have a lot of things what they've done there, and you'll get all these kind of details with the GameBench tests. One of the thing we discussed before we started this webinar, but one of the things that many of those test automation frameworks are not harnessed for is, of course, all the games are pretty much OpenGLES content. They are graphics content. You don't have UI elements. You don't have a characteristics of those UI elements. You don't get any kind of handle on those. So your script doesn't know, is there a button or is there just some screen, some graphics asset or whatever. It's difficult to identify that. I'll show you a bit what we've done. Many of game developers are already using this image recognition feature, where you can actually identify certain UI elements and actually get that game running that test automation through those. let's skip that one. I'll be showing a hands-on demo on this performance-wise. So, I mean, this is the view on a regular run that you get with the when you're running a certain game. You might see CPU doing something. You might see memory get allocated or deallocated, and then you get from GameBench. You get this great insight, great details how that actually game is doing on that specific device. We'll get back to that. Let's talk a bit about components in game testing. So, of course, like in any device and software, you have application, you have middleware, you might have some game engine over there. Then you have different platforms, and that whole entity is actually connected. Maybe some Google service, Google Play service, and or your own backend implementation servers and databases. So all the testing should actually start at design level. How the game is designed, what kind of graphics assets you include over there, files and optimization. Even this can be done with the Test Cloud and GameBench combination. You can even test how certain things run, even it's not ready yet. You can still run that sort of tests. When it becomes really important is that when you have that entity in place, so you want to target that as many devices as you want, you need basically, and this kind of testing. So basically the performance on real hardware is important. And compatibility and variations. So we host, I think, nearly 400 different Android devices and all iOS devices. So instantly you can get those that application of the game running on those devices. And there's only real limitation with the GameBench is that it starts with 4.1 was it 2? Sorry, yeah, something like that. So we'll look at it. Also reference testing. So you might want to see how that game actually communicates with the backend services. And the backend testing itself, of course, this is very script oriented. You build some heavy stress or loads in your game, and you see how that actually, when you have hundreds of thousands of million players at the same time, how does your backend handle that? So in a nutshell, I think this kind of crystallizes my part of this slide deck. That when you have a game development going on, include testing there in your daily activities as well. So once your developers build something, even it's not ready, you can already run it and see how that version regression is actually performing on real devices. If there's a problems, you get instant reports, and your developers can fix that. This is the last one. We've been talking here about image recognition here at Testroid. This is, of course, one example. I still want to highlight, lots of you actually have asked for source code. Please do so. If you still haven't access to this project, I'm happy to share it with you. This is an example package where we have Appium script running hill climb racing game. There's a couple of UI elements as a PNG in that zip file. And basically, when you call some tab on image on screen and certain specific PNG described, you actually give some parameter how long that certain button should be pressed. You see the same happening on that game. And of course, you can do this locally on your one device, for example, or your own device as well. But really the benefit is that when you build a script and for your game, you can do it on our Test Cloud, hundreds of devices. We don't actually limit anyhow what's the simultaneous devices running. So there is no limitations. Pretty typical, actually. It's not rare, but pretty typical is that some people run it on all. They'll get results pretty quickly. They have a lot of data, of course, to analyze and see, but that's really efficient way to run your game instantly on those devices. All right, let's move to GameBench. Sharif, if you would like to say next, I'll click the next slide.
Okay. Thank you, Vidavico. Hi, everybody. Just to say, GameBench, we really are a newcomer to QA, at least from the developer's perspective, the game developer's perspective. Our background and the traction we've gained so far, our app launched last summer, I think, just over a year ago. The traction so far has really been with the hardware side of the ecosystem. So, clients like Qualcomm, NVIDIA, using us to test devices. In some cases pre-release devices, in some cases devices that are already out there in the wild being used. But we really have it in our hearts that we want to bring our tool to developers, to you, and to make it as useful as possible. And this is a journey which kind of begins now. We think that by partnering with Testroid, making this available in an automated way, because historically we're a manual tool, a tool that you run manually on devices, and we have thousands of users all using our tool manually, and you'll see the UI for our sort of manual app. But by partnering with Testroid and opening up these hundreds of devices for automated testing, as Vidavico described, we hope to make our tool useful to you. We think it's useful now, but we think it will get more useful. We're implementing more features even in the next couple of months. Some pretty important new additions have been scheduled in to be implemented, and I'm certainly not here to lecture you on the importance of FPS or the importance of GameBench. I think it's much more for me to listen to you, and my slides really are just prompts for some thoughts about the birth of GameBench and why we're here, and perhaps how we can be useful to you. So please, so this is our intro slide. We see ourselves as a traffic light for mobile apps and for devices. Traditionally, in the device sphere, we had benchmarks like Antutu, GFX Bench, and they are hardware benchmarks designed to reveal the merits or otherwise of devices. We are unique in that we are one benchmark in a way that rates, ranks, reveals the performance and the market readiness, not only of devices, but also of apps. And that's why we see ourselves as a traffic light for the whole ecosystem, really. Next, please, Vidavico. So part of our vision here is just, looking 5 years or so into the future, 4 years into the future. We just see that everything is going to become so crowded. I mean, much of this is already coming to fruition. A lot of money will be made. We know that a proportion of that will be made from gaming. We know that there will be ever more developers joining the fray, 8 million predicted by 2019, all of them looking not only to create great games, great apps, but to stand out against each other, against others in the same genre as them. So even within the same genre of game, you'll find great competition. That's true now, but it will become more true. Same can be said of devices. Ever more devices on the market, potentially ever more fragmented. As a result of that, ever increasing amounts of money spent on testing, and also ever increasing amounts of money lost due to inadequate testing. And that, in a way, we have a shared vision with Testroid here that testing isn't going to get easier or less important. As the market gets more crowded and more valuable, the need for testing will only increase. Next slide, please. So we know that performance is a major factor in user experience. The top factor by sort of reported in this research here is crashes, which of course Testroid does a great job of showing already. And there are many ways of doing crash testing in the wild too, as you all know, various SDK options that you can use. And that accounts for 37% of low opinions expressed about apps and games. But there are many other factors too, and slow performance is definitely one of those, as is heavy battery usage and heavy cellular usage. Now, GameBench can monitor a lot of these things, and when it comes to automated testing, I think it's right for us to focus right now on the second bar here, the 36% slow performance. That is what we can add to Testroid's testing simply by you clicking on a checkbox to enable GameBench before you run a test. And that's something, that's a very simple step, and we'll demo it when we do our hill climb racing demo in a minute. But that is what we want to bring now. So yes, you're already probably looking at crashes and freezes. Please also look at performance. And performance from the gamer's perspective is often described in terms of lag or sort of jitteriness and slow inputs, you would think that perhaps lag doesn't really apply to simple games. But I would argue that any game, even a game like Crossy Road that relies on reflexes, or increasingly these physics-based games. One of my favorite physics-based games is Charles Frontier. When you have a physics-based game, any drop below 60 FPS, any sort of it feels like unnatural. Anything less than natural motion, you could say, in the game is something that people notice. They notice it as lag, and they worry that their inputs aren't going to be treated properly and that they will lose points, fail levels as a result. I mean, this person actually claims to be, I can't remember which app this review was on from Flame Wars, but he claims to be stuck on missions because of lag. Equally, we know that heavy battery usage is something that we want to focus on. We certainly want to bring that to Testroid in the future. We haven't right now, but it's something that GameBench, that we see as very important. The flip side of the coin to performance is energy consumption. And we think that gamers especially are really concerned. I mean, just even a game like Vainglory, which makes great performance claims with its, I think it's called, the engine is called the Evil Engine. It runs at 60 FPS. But a lot of complaints in in the review section on the Play Store about battery drain on that game. So that's what we want to help to tackle. Next slide, please. So without wanting to confuse everybody here, this is actually a shot of our own GameBench user interface. We have a cloud-based user interface for manual testing, so that what happens is you get our app, either the free version or the pro version. You run it on a test device in your studio. You launch the game you want to test from within our app. We have a dashboard, a launcher. No routing is needed. You load up the game. You play for a few minutes if you just want FPS, or you play for 15 minutes if you want battery. And then this data is uploaded to the cloud for you to look at and compare sessions. And so the reason I highlight this one here is just to give you an example of the kinds of things we notice from manual testing, which you may also notice when you start to do automated testing through Testroid. So here we're looking at Monument Valley. We're seeing a report card for Monument Valley, which on the face of it looks great. I can't actually remember which device this one's for. Oh yeah, this is Monument Valley running on the LG G4, a relatively new device. And it's running the game at 51 FPS median, so pretty close to 60 FPS, with 91% stability, which is a great result. And Monument Valley is a classic kind of game that you would have thought perhaps FPS is not so important. It's not a 3D game. It's a 2D game with very simple visuals. But actually, this is the point I was making earlier. You can't predict where FPS is important, at least from us as a tools provider. I mean, we know that a game like Monument Valley depends heavily on smooth scrolling in between levels and so on. You don't want that scrolling to jitter, which it does on some devices. So F51 is pretty good. But if you look at our FPS chart, which is something that it is reflected in your Testroid report, if you've enabled GameBench, that is represented by the yellow dots, the orangey yellow dots on the chart below. So you can see that actually Monument Valley, for the first 10 minutes, actually the first 11 minutes, runs at 50 or slightly, and often above 50 frames a second. So a very healthy frame rate. But then something happens at 11 minutes. What happens at 11 minutes is a couple of things. First of all, the device has been running for 11 minutes, so it's getting hot. So it's possible there's some throttling going on. It's possible that this involves the Snapdragon 808 chipset that's in there. I don't know. But it's also possible that actually it's the level that's coming up here. Chapter 5 is just being loaded up. This is an Italian player, actually. So they're playing the Italian version of Monument Valley. But they're just about to launch Chapter 5 at 11 minutes and 40 seconds. And then we can see that the frame rate drops down to 40 and sometimes below 40. A major issue? I don't know. Not necessarily. But something to keep an eye on, and certainly something that the developer might be interested in. The G4 is a relatively powerful device, but if we saw the same pattern here transplanted, where we were, for example, starting at 30 FPS and dropping to 20, that would be a big concern. So, this is the kind of thing that can be revealed by FPS. Next slide.
Hey, just a quick comment here. I think you made a great point. I've been wondering this myself as well. I mean, I know it's not every game that must be tested performance wise must be a 3D game. We see a lot of laggy native applications even, and of course 2D games where you have a performance issue. Like I can say Twitter, for example, as a native application. I see significant lagging, and there's of course different reasons why certain is lagging. You might have a lot of content over there, but as a question, how does GameBench actually? I mean, it works fine with the 2D games, but how does it
Yes.
work with the native applications?
Yeah, well, a lot of people actually use us for native applications. It tends to be for things that are still visual. So we've had companies use us to test the smoothness of video. So in Europe, you would expect video to run at 25 frames a second. GameBench is running in the background and is monitoring the behavior of the device at a pretty deep level, with access straight to the GPU and so on. So it doesn't have to be a game that's running there. We're not dependent on any game engine to run on any platform as such. I mean, we're iOS and Android, but we're running at a deep level of the operating system. And so we can run for apps as well as games. And we've had people use us for scroll speed in a social networking app, for example, for navigation. And plus there are apps that I always find apps on my phone that I kind of say to myself, damn, I need to do a GameBench test on this and tell the developer, because it's just scrolling in a really kind of haphazard way. And I notice it, and I'm sure others do. So yeah, a sat nav is another one where you expect the map to move and scroll smoothly, and also streaming. So often you can use us also for streaming, not just to test the stability of the frame rate, but different streaming services, Netflix, for example, versus BBC iPlayer. They do the same thing, but they exert different stresses and strains on the hardware and on the battery. And they use different amounts of network traffic to get the same end result. So I think that increasingly, whether the developer does the scrutiny or not, increasingly the ecosystem will do the scrutiny to find out the most efficient or the best, the smoothest mapping software, for example, or the most efficient streaming software. This scrutiny can be applied to apps just as much as to games.
Excellent.
And GameBench runs regardless. I mean, it's monitoring the behavior of the display, the GPU,
Mhm.
regardless of what it's being used for.
Yeah, that's really useful feature. I think it's not all about 3D games, but even native applications. There's just so many things. You mentioned the streaming, those players, that have probably significant variations in the performance. So
Yeah. Yeah.
excellent.
Also, using camera playback, especially with the move to 4K. So we have camera apps that are now recording 4K video and playing back 4K video. And really, you shouldn't expect that just because it's 4K, the user will be happy with a hot overheating device, or with a device that burns the battery quicker, or with a device that stutters, the video stutters, just because it's 4K. If you promise 4K to users, then it should be really with the same user experience that you delivered at 1080. And so we have people using us for that reason too.
All right, let's go next
Yeah.
one.
Go next one. Thank you. As I mentioned, we've been used so far, our traction has been on the hardware side. So we've been ranking devices by their ability to play games. And what we're looking at here is a chart showing the median frame rate and the minimum frame rate revealed by GameBench through manual testing. Again, this is stuff you'll be able to do with Testroid now, but this is all from manual testing of a couple of games here, Asphalt 8 and Real Racing, 2 games in the same genre, running on 6 top devices, both iOS and Android. And in a way, we've pivoted the data here by device. So we're ranking by device. You can see that the HTC One M9 performs great, the Nexus 6 performs less great on Asphalt 8, but you could equally imagine this data being pivoted to be ranked by the app. So rather than ranking the device, we can rank the app according to the same according to the same data set, to say which of the driving games is best optimized across these devices, which are very popular in the ecosystem. So that's a wholly different question. And if we look down here, I mean, in a way, they're pretty close to each other, but you could argue that perhaps Real Racing 3 is marginally better, but if you focus on medium frame rate, or if you look at the worst case scenario, minimum frame rate, then maybe Asphalt 8 is better, because Asphalt 8 never drops below 20 FPS except on one device, the slightly older Nexus 6. So for the current generation of rival devices, the G4, the iPhones, the S6, the M9, we could actually say that Asphalt 8 is the superior game. It's the same data set again, but we've pivoted it by app. And increasingly, I think that there are a couple of reasons why you would want to pivot the data this way. Because it's not just use of the FPS as a measurement isn't just about user experience. We think it's also about promotion. When you're in a crowded genre of games, just as Vainglory is doing now by promoting its FPS, you need to stand out and you need to show the user that you've anticipated their needs and you've made an effort to optimize. And so, if Asphalt 8 could claim it's better optimized for devices, for popular devices than Real Racing 3, then that information is commercially valuable. So it's not just about improving the user experience, although I would say that's the primary use of QA and FPS, but it's also increasingly, we feel, about promoting your game within a busy genre, in this case, the driving genre. I hope that's clear. Maybe the next slide, if you would, Vilovaiko, will make it clearer. So what have we got here? Yeah, so, I've noticed that manufacturers are increasingly looking for showcase examples. Am I right? I mean, I've got Vainglory for Android, but I think Vainglory actually made a very prominent feature of an WWDC, or Apple made a big deal of it at the time anyway. OEMs are looking to showcase their devices, give people a reason to buy their devices. And we can't assume that just because a device is recent, that it does a good job with a game. And if it doesn't do a good job with a game, you're not going to get showcased in any way. And here's an example. This is a Chinese device, a very recent Chinese device. This is the MX4 Pro. That's the Meizu MX4 Pro. I think I'm right in saying. Correct me if I'm wrong. So anyway, a recent device. It's cheap compared to Western devices, but it's not cheap relative to Chinese devices. This is kind of like the cutting edge 300-pound Chinese device. Playing Asphalt 8, and here we can see a median FPS of 14 frames a second with a very low stability of 63%. So we have a relatively old and established and very popular game, Asphalt 8, running on a relatively new, supposedly highly spec'd, highly equipped Chinese device, but with a bad user experience. And now I didn't mention these red dots in the previously, but these red dots are something we hope to bring to you in your Testroid UI as well, so that you'll be able to see what we're calling janks, which are really just a measure of microstutter. So the stutter, not just the FPS at a second by second level, average FPS at a second by second level, but you could also imagine these janks, these red dots, as the frequency of stutters within a second. So it's a more minute measure, and we often find that the two things are correlated. When a device is stressed, when its FPS is going down, not only can the FPS be reduced, but also you get microstutter coming in. And Asphalt 8 is a game actually that commonly suffers from microstutter, even on devices which report a relatively high FPS. So we hope to bring you janks too in the future. But this is a game with low FPS and bad janks, just a jittery experience. And I don't see any way that Asphalt 8, which would help to showcase this device. In fact, it's a liability both for the game and the device that a lot of people are going to experience a pretty bad experience with this game. Let's move on, please, PV. Just as an example of what I have been talking about. So, performance can equal promotion, and I've noticed this. I'm not saying Windows Phone is perfect at this, but I think by being a relative newcomer to sort of the QA side of mobile, like they've been able to be a bit more systematic. GameBench doesn't support Windows Phone, but actually I'm beginning to learn more about what they do for QA and have some respect for it, which is, they have a certification program. I don't know if it includes FPS necessarily, but there is a certification program called WAC, Windows something certification kit. I can't remember exactly what it stands for. Microsoft used that to ascertain whether new games and apps work even on low-end devices like the new Lumia 640. And when they find that a game, like here, the Gameloft games in front of you, run well on that phone, then in a way it frees them up to use these Gameloft games as a promotional a reason to own a 640, and of course by extension to own these games. But if these games ran with the sort of jitteriness that we just saw on the MX4 Pro, then of course this would be a futile gesture. I mean, Microsoft just wouldn't do it. So that's just, I think, to round off my point about performance also being about promotion, a way to promote yourselves and a way to establish partnerships with the hardware side of the industry. And that's something that we at GameBench want to help to orchestrate those partnerships more. Next slide, please. So here I just want to make the point that even if you don't scrutinize your FPS, I really think that you should be aware that others will do the scrutiny for you. So yes, we have traction with the hardware side and with the QA side, and increasingly with the engine and the developer side too. But look, we also have a lot of journalists that use our tools, and also a lot of small indie developers and just straightforward enthusiasts. We have our app is used already by thousands of people who are not developers and who are not even part of the industry. They're just ordinary enthusiasts for mobile who want to find out how well their device is doing at running a game that they want to play. And they use our free app. We see their data as a result. So they get the tool for free. We get their data. That's the sort of exchange that we offer. And these people are doing it because they want to scrutinize and talk about the way their phone is performing and the way the games they love are performing, as do the journalists. And these corners of the ecosystem will apply that scrutiny, we think, even if developers don't. And just to say, in terms of these sort of users who are in a way just using us for no reason other than love of the ecosystem, love of their phones, love of mobile gaming, we have over 40,000 downloads since we started. And in any one day, we have about 250 users just at any moment, actually, 250 people just using us, testing games. And we think hardly any of them really are developers, since developers we know want automated tools. I mean, some of them, of course, we know are developers, but the bulk we think are enthusiasts. Next slide, please. So the scrutiny I mentioned, it takes place before. Good scrutiny, I think, takes place pre-release. That scrutiny will come from the chip makers, the chip designers, OEM, and from you guys. We hope that you will do a lot of pre-release scrutiny. But just to say, there's going to be plenty of scrutiny afterwards. And we also are increasingly working with people on the retail side, such as carriers, mobile network operators who have stores, for example. They want to help recommend phones to people based on discovering what kind of apps and games those people want to use. They will then feed that data to us, and we can tell them which device performs best at that cocktail of use cases that the consumer is looking for. So again, that's post-release scrutiny, and we would always want a good game to have great post-release scrutiny, but the scrutiny is going to come nevertheless. Next slide, please. Just more examples of scrutiny. A lot of interest in the media for the data that we provide. We recently did a report called the Battle of the Sixes. It was the first objective, quantitative analysis of gaming performance across Android and iOS. So the same games like Monument Valley, Kill Shot, Modern Combat 5, Boom Beach, the same games, 10 of them ranked across both platforms, and the media really picked up on it. There's a hunger for this sort of information, and now increasingly the media is just using our tools manually themselves. And as I mentioned it at the start, we can pivot that data. We can tell you of those 10 games which are the best optimized across devices, just as we can say which are the best devices to play those games. Okay, I mean, that's my final slide. I think the next one is there one more just about who we are?
Yeah, it's about your team.
Yeah, so I'm not in that photo because I'm too good looking. They didn't want to spoil it. But I'll be in the next slide. But we are led by Shri, our boss, and Karthik, our sort of technical boss, who's also on the line here and ready to answer questions. We're based in Bristol in terms of development. We're in London. We are human beings and always love to hear from people. We always respond on email. So even though we have this integration with Testroid, feel free to reach out either to Vilovico or to us directly. And the next slide, I think, has me and my email. However you want to get in touch with us, I'm sure Vilovico would agree, we're happy to receive it and channel the question to the right person.
Absolutely.
So please do get in touch.
We will run, of course, more active guest blogging and blogging also at Tester Blog, which is really popular among you guys. So, Sharif has promised me to write more about the GameBench features and news there as well. So we will definitely keep this information flow for you guys. Whenever new things happen, you will get it through us as well, of course. But there's a good way you can go to gamebench.net and also register for their newsletter and of course get in touch personally with Sharif or
Also we have events. If you're in London, the next event is on, I think, October the 15th, in central London. So, a workshop, a chance to meet the hardware side of the industry, see what help they can give to you, to reduce the pain in your QA and so on. So we do events. Connect with us, follow our newsletter, and you'll get the latest. Have I gone on? Because I hope I've left time for the more important thing, which is just the demo of hill climb racing. We have time, don't we, Vico? I hope.
we
And the
definitely
QA.
do. We definitely do. We
Okay, good.
will run over
I
time.
always lose track of time. Apologies if I'm
No
too verbose.
problem. Thank you so much for a great explanation, and it was really for me as well. I've been in gaming or close to the developing these real time graphics 20 years ago, pretty much. So I really find it fascinating, and it's very important for game developers to see how these things work. So let's move to the demo. So we have as a demonstration today, we have we're going to use this classic hill climb racing, and we have a game bench enabled. So we will use, of course, real devices at Tester Cloud. Let's see how it works, and then we will get back to the QA. You'll probably see my screen. So I'm going to log in to Tester Cloud right now, and as we are running those tests on a device, it takes a few minutes, so we have a great time to answer any of your questions if you have. So, okay, pretty much how Tester Cloud works. So over here, of course, you can manage the projects, you can create new projects, new test runs. You can configure all these specific things for how do you want it to run and so on. We'll actually have a test run here already. So I created a new project called New Game Test Project, and it's included already to save some time. I'm not going to upload again the hill climb racing, but it's under here in Testroid 1. So, of course, in Testroid Cloud, when you have a project where you have uploaded APK, it automatically takes that as a basis when you click the new test run. So let's go there. Now we, of course, get this 4-stage widget. So we are not going to change the file. I click just simply next. I'm going to use app crawler because it will be easy to demonstrate. We don't have to build tests. I do have a lot of tests also for the hill climb racing, for example. If you want to see how the image recognition works, please get in touch with me, and I'll be happy to share the project with you, and you can try it out. But to save time, we are going to use the app crawler here. App crawler, if you're not familiar, it's basically intelligent kind of application crawler that goes through the application, pokes and presses buttons, and tries to find menus and things. Even in an OpenGLS context, it progresses through the game or the application if it's strictly graphics content. So it really works to kind of smoke testing wise. It gives you instant results, and you don't have to play with the test files. Okay, we have an option here to take any of the devices. We currently have 345 unique Android models available. We have a lot of new devices, actually, my colleague just blogged about today. So I'm going to give it a run here with the new Android devices. And here comes the important part. So when and if you want to enable GameBench for your game or even native application, please enable this button over here. And of course, as said, it supports Android versions 4.1.2 and above. So all of that. So we have a lot of devices above that. You can actually give it a run and see. There is no charge. There is no fee right now for the GameBench. So please try it out, see, and let us know what you think about it. It's a really cool feature. You don't have to configure any of the other components or configurations. Just click the start, and there goes your test. So we selected 31 devices, and we will, of course, see how the things are going here. Meanwhile, while we are waiting that our test is getting finalized, many of these devices are already rebooting, cleaning those. Some of them are actually soon installing the app and so on. But maybe meanwhile, if you have any questions, please use the right hand side box, and we can actually, while we're waiting this result, few minutes. It really takes a few minutes, so we can answer a few of your questions. Okay, let's hear. Both native and hybrid are ways to fulfill the different needs and preferences of users and developers, and none of them can be. What do we have here? But in performance for games, which has a better way to cover the performance. Let me crystallize this question. It's rather long.
Can you share? Can you cut and paste the question and share it with me somehow, EV?
Yeah, probably. This is quite lengthy question. Let me try if I can send you.
It could be by email or through this, however you like.
It'll be there on chat box. Another question while you're actually reading and preparing about the power consumption. So do we have a feature? We haven't actually enabled power consumption in Testro Cloud with GameBench yet, but like Sharif said, there's tons of great new features coming in. And of course, FPS is important for the performance-wise. So we've been looking into that, and that's what we've integrated with the Testro to start with.
This question that's come through here, I think it's a question about whether we've seen any patterns in the performance which would suggest whether native or, I mean, when the question here refers to hybrid games, is this a mixture of native and web-based game creation? But they're asking about which one tends to offer better performance. I think that's how they intend the question. And it's a very good question. I mean, GameBench in our database from our free users, I think we currently have data on pairings of over 1,500 devices running over 3,000 different apps. So pretty much any device you can think of, and pretty much any of the top 3,000 most popular apps, we have data on. And I'm pretty sure if we interrogated the data to compare a web-based game, HTML5 apps versus natively coded apps. I'm not a developer, as you can probably tell by my stuttering. Like I said, very much from the outside here. But I think we could certainly filter the data that way, and it may reveal some interesting results. I do think that from speaking to some of the developers that use us, it's often counterintuitive what will happen. So, for example, I've always, having interrogated a lot of the data myself to look at different GPUs, for example, since most of the research I've done on our data has been for hardware clients who are interested in the performance of their silicon or their devices. I've always been, the pattern is usually to be seeing the GPU maxed out. So the GPU in a game is often at 85% usage, and on a well-optimized game, actually, you can see GPU usage goes all the way up to 100%. You know, it actually shows that the capability of the device is being used well. But bottlenecks happen when that 100% of GPU usage is not enough. So you know, I'm used to seeing GPU limited games, but it's surprising to me sometimes when I see games made with engines. Engines which make it very easy to go cross-platform, but they sometimes create bottlenecks in the CPU because of the way they're trying to handle graphics. And you know, this is something I can't understand from a developer perspective, but which I see a lot of developers getting stuck on. That even the great graphics in their game is causing a CPU bottleneck rather than a GPU bottleneck. And so asking questions of the data in this way often yields some counterintuitive results. And so I wouldn't hazard a guess as to which one is better for performance. But I would love to look into it, and feel free to connect afterwards. I may have completely misinterpreted your question, so yeah, connect with me and we'll figure something out.
There's a couple of questions related to FPS. So why is FPS limited to 60 frames per second typically on the devices? That's a great question as well. Do you want?
Yeah, well, this seems to be what Android, since Project Butter, has settled on a device refresh rate of 60 FPS, an operating system which runs at 60 FPS, ideally, matching the physical refresh rate of the display. Project Butter with Android, that was quite a few generations ago, I think, when Project Butter happened, sought to standardize the look, the feel of the navigable, the underlying UI of the operating system should flow at 60 frames a second. And I think that as a result, that set the benchmark of user expectations. So someone recently, in the journalist side, someone used our tool recently to show that TouchWiz slightly lags compared to stock Android. Bringing the FPS down to 55, I think, or 53. So, actually not major lag, but causing lag, because what's happened is now that, for whatever reason, having settled on 60 FPS, which also incidentally is the sort of the target FPS for console gaming, on the PS4, for example, it's an industry-wide thing, 60 FPS. But now it's set the user expectation. If you want your game to feel as fluid as the operating system, then you need to target 60 FPS. Realistically, many just target 30 FPS, but even then, what you're doing is saying that when the user loads up your game, they will experience a subconscious drop from the fluidity of their phone as they're used to using it, down to a kind of new world of your game world. And many games are fine at 30 FPS, but nevertheless, you're asking the user to kind of make a jump, just as you would ask a user to make a jump if they're watching 24 frame a second video, which is filmic frame rate, versus watching, say, news footage. And we know that people subjectively notice these things. That's why so many people hate The Hobbit, for example. It forced them to switch to a higher frame rate when in the cinema they're used to a low frame rate. They didn't know why they hated it, but they did. So however 60 FPS came about, it is here. It's industry-wide, not just mobile, and it has set the user expectation.
All right. As we speak, actually, we got the first results ready. So I'm looking the some variant of S6, Samsung Galaxy S6 here, and its performance. I mean, it was relatively short session. Something apparently when with the app crawler clicked something that, if we look at this one, it was clicking something that, yeah. So app crawler, of course, have it will make money for your apps as well, because it clicks some advertisers and stuff like that. So it will open a browser, but here's the one example of the frames per second graph for this game. So
I mean, in this case, this is the FPS of the operating system, as I was just mentioning, because it didn't really load the playable aspects of the game. So often we find that menus run at 60 FPS when they shouldn't actually. They can save battery by running menus that are much lower FPS.
And as always, of course, we are producing the screenshots. We are producing the basic performance, CPU, memory load. But for the frames per second graph, this is what we are getting out of GameBench here for a test run, and it's really good stuff that we like we saw on Shari's presentation. There was if you have a consistent 60 frame or close to that performance, it doesn't really change a lot, but we see minor changes here in the, let's say, 54, 58, something like that, close to the 60. Should developers be worried about this kind of stuff?
I personally don't think so. I think that sometimes there'll be curiosity about why there was a drop. I mean, here, just again, on this example, this isn't really relating to the gameplay, because app crawler kind of let us down, I think, on this session. It didn't, the randomness of app crawler meant we didn't get into the game. But no, when I filter data, I tend to regard anything of around 53, 54, 55 and above as being 60 FPS, because I really don't think that those drops are perceptible, really, to the ordinary gamer. And what actually tends to happen is that you start to categorize games based on the developer intention. So you have 30 FPS games, and when and a 30 FPS game, you think, well, it should never really drop below 25. If you make that sort of, if you create a game world where the fluidity expectation is set at 30 FPS, then you should, if you pick 30 FPS, you should be stable at that. You should have really above 85% stability, But of course, there will be 15% of the time which is not spent at the median frame rate will be lower often. But I don't think a drop of a few frames below your target is that significant because you've set a user expectation, and a momentary drop that is barely noticeable. I don't think it's major. I think that what is a problem is sometimes you see games that are targeted at 60 FPS and then suddenly drop right down to 30 or 40 FPS. And it's a shame because I think that's actually as noticeable sometimes to the user as if it had been a drop from 30 to 20. So in a way, by setting their targets too high and then not being able to maintain stability, I think that users then notice changes between levels, changes between sections of a level. And again, they may not know why, but they just may notice that their inputs aren't really, don't translate to in-game action as quickly. So big drops, I think, are more important than these small drops of a few FPS. But the key thing is to pick your FPS, whether it's 30 or 60, and stick to it.
Right, yeah. We have a lot of questions about iOS as well. So, do you have anything to share on the iOS front?
So our iOS is in alpha, but the open beta is coming very soon, and I think we have a link on our site to register your interest to be part of our beta phase. So I mean, we are using iOS internally and for clients, and we have a lot of interesting iOS data on our database. Often it shows just the amazing stability of frame rates that have been achieved by game developers on iOS. We see that iOS developers, I mean, all developers, usually you're putting out to both iOS and Android, but on iOS, you set your target at 30 or 60, and on iOS, you just stick to it. No matter whether it's the iPhone 6 or the 6 Plus, which has a higher resolution, seems to have very little impact because you've built in a safety buffer that even on the higher res 1080, the only 1080p iPhone is the 6 Plus, but enough buffer has been built into iOS in terms of a sort of safety buffer that the games don't struggle. Whereas on Android, we see that the frame rates are all over the place. And we would love for developers to get in touch, register their interest to use our beta iOS. At the moment, we are offering, at the moment it's tethering based. It's slightly less convenient than the Android thing. So, I mean, it's still quite convenient. You plug in your iOS device. This is for manual testing, right? We haven't implemented for Testroid integration. But if you're up for manual testing, you just plug in your iOS device over, Lightning connection to your Mac. You have to have a developer license from Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And so long as you do that, you can then run our GameBench app in a very, very similar way, and using the same and outputting the same data. So you can then in our cloud dashboard do direct Android to iOS comparisons, and we see a lot of people doing that who we've invited to use the alpha stage, but that's a very closed beta because we're happy with the quality of the data coming through, the reliability, but there's a lot of crashes.
There's actually,
when we come to beta, which is soon, you won't need a dev certificate. And Karthik, I don't know if you're muted. Karthik is here, is our CTO. You won't need. He's saying you won't need to be tethered for the beta, and you won't need to be having a dev certificate, and that is coming soon.
okay. I'm unmuting Karthik. Hello.
Hi there. Hello, everyone. Yeah, hi, this is Karthik here. Yeah, as good to join you, and thanks, Oliveko and Sharif, for hosting this. Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Sharif was saying. In our iOS product, I think when we launch our beta, it will be you can profile any iOS device from tethered using a Mac or a Windows machine as well. We're going to remove the limitation that it has to be a Mac, which means that you'd be able to profile even without a developer certificate. So that's coming later on in the beta, and hopefully at that point in time, we will also be able to integrate with Testroid. So we can get all the lovely data that we're getting for Android on iOS as well. So yeah, we're getting there. We are in active development at the moment. Once it's done, feel free to write to us, and then we'll be able to give you guys a beta so you can try it out as well.
Is it too early to go into details? I have a couple of questions here related to Xcode integration, but For example, the
Yes.
how do you integrate it with your internal Xcode environment if you have a beta or alpha available right now?
There's no integration to Xcode. This would be more a standalone tool
Hmm.
where I mean Xcode has its own measurement functionality, which is called instruments. I mean, we are going to be standing alone. The aim of the tool was the aim of the current tool is that it should be able to run not only on Mac but on Linux, but on Windows, on a cross-platform environment. Be able to run headlessly as well, which the Apple Instruments tool isn't very great at. So we would like to support all of that, and our current aim is to not to have a plugin for Xcode, but you'd be able to launch performance testing from the command line, let's say using a script like what you do at the moment. Let's say in the future, maybe using APM or something like that. You'd be able to say launch this game inside in an iPhone 6 Plus, and then measure performance at the same time, get all the data uploaded to a test drive cloud or a GameBench cloud. So no, Xcode plugin is not on our mind at the moment.
Okay. Appium is actually one of the hottest, one of the most popular framework right now. I mean, it's really used platform wise. You have actually iOS, Android. If your application is pretty much unique or identical on both platforms, even it's not, you can still configure things in your script. So Appium really is a good choice right now, and we see a lot of game developers actually using Appium. We typically have one of the each and every time we have the same question in these webinars, that what frameworks works the best for the games. I'm personally kind of favoring Appium currently because first of all, like I said, it's cross-platform, and also you have basically free of choice with your framework, so you can actually, all the programming languages, you can select any of those popular ones, and you have a really versatile offering on that wise. Also, we've been building this image recognition feature I showed during my part of the presentation. You can actually use it with other frameworks as well, but with Appium it's straightforward. You don't actually need to configure those desired capabilities like you do in Selenium and Appium in general. When you run it on the client side, you can actually just get that script done and define all those graphical elements, buttons, and things that you want to find in your game, and then test script will be hammering. And there's also questions related to that. So does GameBench work on Tesla Cloud with that? Apparently, someone had give it a try, and it did not show the FPSs. As mentioned, some of the older devices, 4.1.2, or if you have older Android version, or if we actually have an Android device that's older than that, we do have a lot of those as well. But of course, GameBench doesn't work on those. But we are significantly. We're talking about 85% of the volumes that are above that OS level. So it's really not that important. Questions also about the logging. So what kind of log information does GameBench provide, and how frequently? Can you tweak that? Currently, we don't have an option to tweak it at Tesla Cloud, but is there anything on a GameBench configuration you could do?
Um, Logging, as in, I don't know exactly what they mean by logging, but
Output something in the logs.
you mean something like Logcat?
Yes, logcats and logs, logging something, like putting something in the logs.
Okay, okay, fine, yeah. So there is a couple of things that we've planned. One is um, uh, you'll be able to instrument your source with GameBench, so which means that in the source you can say, hey, GameBench, I'm starting a new level here, and then we'll pick that up, and then you can kind of correlate it with with the measurement. So we'll mark it. So something like a marker for interesting scenes or interesting things that happen in your rendering or in your different levels. That's something that we're looking at. In terms of actual logs, logcat, we're also looking at crash statistics that anyway you would get right now from Testroid. So those are the two things that come to my mind.
Mhm.
Other than that, in terms of data itself, I'm sure Sharif covered. We look at FPS, we look at power consumption. Power consumption is something we're adding now. At the moment, we have only battery usage, but we're going to measure actual milliwatts being consumed by the particular device. Obviously, if a particular game is consuming 1,000 milliwatts on a form factor of 5-inch constantly, you know that the battery drain is going to be high. So that's something we're looking at. We also are implementing GPU usage. So quickly you can understand if your game is going to be limited on the GPU front on any device. So one of the classic use cases would be for you to run your game on a suite of different architectures. So you would want to choose a GPU from ARM, which is Mali. You would want to choose an IMG GPU. You would want to choose an Adreno GPU. You would want to choose a Vivante GPU. Run your game on these 4 different architectures and figure out if the performance is lower on any of them. Then that will give you a quick indication of is there any hardware chipset nasties, like what Villevico was talking about. You should chipset is very important. So those will give you a quick understanding of whether the GPU usage is high on one particular chipset. So that's something we're working on. We have support for many GPUs already. Another thing that we look forward to adding is thread usage. When we get around, then we'll be able to integrate that as well. So if your app, we'll be able to see which of the threads are actually consuming the most CPU cycles. Then of course memory, which is one that Villevico kind of highlighted. So,
but Karthik, if I might just jump in, I'd say, this is the time to please tell us what you want. I think that you're bound to experience some frustrations with the limitations of what we've done. I think what we've done so far is get our engineers together, GameBench and Testroid, and get the FPS working, get basic implementation. But it's not up to us in a way to set the future priorities. We should be setting the priorities of what to implement, whether it's in terms of logging or anything else, based on your needs. And we know we've had feedback for iOS, lots of feedback on the need for iOS, the need to compare the same data across both platforms. So the same interface, a chart side by side of how this game ran on an Android phone, how it ran on an iOS phone, with the same data, the same metrics being compared. We're pretty close to delivering that. But if you, I mean, there may be someone on this call right now who's been using GameBench, either standalone manual testing or the automated integration with Testroid. And if you're here now, or if you want to do it afterwards, please let us know the frustrations or what's missing or what you would love to see added.
Yeah, well summed up, Sharif. Yeah, we are always looking for feedback on what to add. I mean, the features that we've added with Testroid or standalone are what we think was useful with feedback from some developers. But let us know if there is something on your list, then we'd be more than happy to have a discussion and see how we can schedule it in.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
I wanted to highlight this cover slide at the end as we recommend you to get in touch with us. So please connect with Sharif if you have any questions or feedback, or if some feature requests, or if you just want to say hi. Here's Sharif's email, mine as well.
It's just Sharif at GameBench.net.
Right.
It probably works, Sharif.sark as well, but just Sharif at. It was on my last slide too.
Oh, excellent. Okay, let's just Sharif and GameBench.net. and you'll get hold of him. I want to end this to a final question, probably by a media guy who was asking that could you guys together produce some statistics how games and devices, different devices work, and maybe publish that at Tester blog. And that's definitely something we can jointly work and get some outlines or some results out how we can actually show progress in certain games, and of course different silicon how they perform.
Yeah, anonymized stats of the type that you presented earlier, Villaviper, would be great. Once we get a lot of you guys enabling, just checking that box for GameBench, I think we'll get a ton of data through, and it's amazing what we can do with that data. And if you check out the blog at GameBench.net, then you can see some of the more hardware-oriented results that we've been getting. But in terms of broad macro analytics, we'll get that based on your guys' usage, and once we have enough data to anonymize it and all the rest of it, so we're not revealing anything about individual games that probably haven't even been released yet. But once we get to that tipping point, I think we'll get a ton of interesting stuff which can then be used to guide the development process for future. So the data of what we've done will help to avoid mistakes in what we do next.
Perfect. All right. Sounds very good, and I want to thank everybody attending this webinar today, and there's definitely more coming in the future, so we'll definitely want to provide you another chance at some point to host what we've been doing and what kind of progress we have had jointly together with this kind of product combination. So we'll definitely looking forward to host another webinar at some point. Also, meanwhile, as said, please provide us feedback, provide us comments. How do you like GameBench? What features you want to see in Testroid, and how do you want them to integrate against each other? Those kind of things, of course, are very valuable to us, and we're looking forward to hear from you. From my end and from my side and Testroid's side, I want to thank everybody, and Sharif, if you want to say a few words, we'll end after that.
I would echo that. Now's the time to get involved with feedback. We have tough skins, and we're ready to prioritize based on what you say. I'm grateful for you all to be here and to listen to me ramble on, and I just hope we can be useful to you. So get in touch.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll be ending now this webinar. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.